Some stories start with a bang, a gunshot, a declaration of war, an event that changes everything in a flash. This isn't one of those stories. This one begins quietly, in a room filled with the soft clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of expensive secrets. It starts with a single, almost invisible thread. But when I pulled it, one of the most audacious frauds of the 21st century began to unravel. It's the story of a man who built an empire on air, a king in a castle of cards. And it's the story of how I, an ambitious but basically unknown journalist, accidentally brought it all crashing down. It was the most exclusive party of the year, and everyone was mesmerized by our host, a mysterious billionaire said to have built his empire in total secrecy. He was a ghost, a myth whispered about in boardrooms and on yacht decks, and tonight he'd finally stepped into the light. The penthouse was a galaxy of glittering people, all orbiting this strange, quiet sun. But I saw something no one else did. One single, impossible detail that told me his entire life was a lie. Before that night, Silas Thorne was more of a concept than a person. For years, the financial world had been buzzing about a new player, a specter moving with impossible speed. He was supposedly a genius investor who'd made his first billion before 30, all from the shadows. The press, myself included, had tried to pin him down, but it was like trying to photograph smoke. No public records, no interviews, no verified history. Just a trail of stunning acquisitions, a Swiss biotech firm, a portfolio of rare earth mineral rights, a small AI company that was now crushing its competition. His holding company, Athelred Global, was registered in so many offshore jurisdictions, tracing its ownership was a fool's errand. His legend was built on this invisibility. In an age of oversharing tech bros and celebrity CEOs, Thorne was a complete enigma. Was he old money, the secret heir to a European dynasty? Some claimed he was a former spy who'd applied his skills to the market. The stories were wild, contradictory, and totally captivating. They painted a picture of a man who wasn't just rich, but powerful in a way money alone can't buy. He wasn't playing the game. He was playing a different game entirely, by rules only he knew. And I desperately wanted in. My name is Alex Reyes. Back then, I was a mid-level journalist for a respectable but not top-tier financial news outlet. I was hungry. I watched my peers break stories on crypto scams and corporate scandals, getting book deals and becoming names themselves. I was stuck writing market analysis. Silas Thorne was my white whale. A real expose on him wouldn't just be a story, it would make my career. For 18 months, I poured my spare time into the Thorne file. I subscribed to private jet trackers. I set up alerts for art auctions. I schmoozed with low-level analysts and bitter ex-employees from companies Athelred had acquired. It was a digital ghost hunt. Every lead just dissolved. He didn't seem to exist. Then the invitation arrived, an embossed, impossibly heavy card delivered by a courier who needed a signature and a fingerprint scan. It was an invitation to the launch of the Thorne Foundation for the Arts at his new triplex penthouse overlooking Central Park. After years of silence, the ghost was hosting a party, and my name, somehow, was on the list. I never found out why. A source I'd cultivated? A clerical error? Or maybe Thorne himself decided to let a little of the world in. Didn't matter. I was going. This was my chance. The party was everything the rumors promised. It felt like a movie set. A-list actors were mingling with hedge fund managers. A former prime minister was chatting with a world-famous architect. And the apartment, it was less a home than a private museum. A Monet hung casually in the hallway, not far from a Picasso. The very air hummed with power. And then he appeared. Silas Thorne was not what I expected. He wasn't some charismatic, lifelike figure. He was small, unassuming, with a boyish face and glasses that seemed a bit too big. He looked more like a grad student than a master of the universe. He spoke softly, almost awkwardly. This, I realized, was his genius. His power didn't come from projecting dominance, but from its total absence. He was a blank canvas everyone projected their own ideas onto. He was a master of psychological misdirection with a humility that made his rumored power seem even more profound. He was a walking, talking embodiment of the dark triad, the narcissist's need for admiration, the psychopath's lack of empathy, and the Machiavellian's cold, calculating approach to getting what he wanted. And I desperately wanted in. I watched him for an hour, trying to find a crack in the facade. Nothing. He was flawless. He listened more than he spoke, deflecting praise with a shrug. I was starting to believe the myth myself. My one shot, and I was blowing it, just another star-struck guest. Dejected, I decided to do one last lap before heading home. I wandered into a quieter study. This was Thorne's inner sanctum, bookshelves lined with first editions, and above the fireplace, there it was, the centerpiece of his collection, the painting he'd reportedly paid a 9-figure sum for just 6 months prior, the Concert by Johannes Vermeer. Now, I'm no art expert, but as a journalist, I'm a professional skeptic. I've learned that you uncover fraud by asking the simple questions everyone else is too intimidated to ask. So, I took a photo with my phone, not as a souvenir, but as a data point for my file. And as I looked at the painting, I felt a tiny, dissonant note in a perfect symphony. I stepped closer. I looked at the face of the woman playing the lute, at the light on her satin dress, and then I saw it. The detail, the impossible detail. A crack, a tiny hairline fracture in the paint, a specific pattern of craquelure that develops over centuries. I had seen this exact pattern before. I had stared at it on a high-resolution image just weeks back. But that was the problem. The real Vermeer had been stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston in 1990. It has never been found. Its empty frame still hangs on the museum wall. Of course, forgeries exist. Forgers like Han van Meriken and Wolfgang Beltracchi were masters of their craft, tricking experts for decades. They can replicate style, materials, even aging, but they can't replicate the unique, unrepeatable chaos of 350 years of history. The specific, microscopic pattern of cracks on a masterpiece is like a fingerprint, unique. And the pattern on the painting in front of me wasn't just similar to the stolen Vermeers, it was identical. My mind was racing. How? There were only 2 ways. Either Silas Thorne had secretly acquired the world's most famous stolen artwork and was brazenly hanging it in his living room, or this wasn't the real painting. But if it was a fake, how did it have the exact same crack pattern? Modern forgers can't perfectly replicate the natural aging of a 17th century masterpiece down to the microscopic level. That level of detail is considered practically impossible to reproduce with 100% accuracy. That left one terrifying and absurd possibility. This painting wasn't a modern forgery trying to be the old one. It was a modern print, a high-resolution digital reproduction of the stolen painting, artificially aged to look old. It was an insane thought, a billionaire hanging a poster in a multi-million-dollar frame. It made no sense. Why would a man who could afford any painting on Earth display a fake? Unless he couldn't. Unless the Monet in the hall was also a fake, and the Picasso, and the penthouse, and the jets. What if it was all fake? That was the threat, the tiny snag in the magnificent tapestry of Silas Thorne. Everyone else saw a billionaire with a questionable masterpiece. I saw a cheap print where a masterpiece should be. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just a story about art. This was a story about everything.
The days after the party were a blur of adrenaline and paranoia. I felt like I was sitting on the biggest secret in the world. I was terrified of being wrong, but even more terrified of being right. If Thorne was a fraud on this scale, he wasn't just some social climber. He was dangerous. My first step was to prove my gut feeling about the painting. I reached out to a contact, an art history professor who specialized in authenticating old masters. I didn't tell her my crazy theory. I just sent her the photo from the party and the best image I could find of the stolen Gardner Vermeer. My question was simple. Could a forger, no matter how skilled, replicate the craquelure pattern of a 350-year-old painting with 100% accuracy? Her reply came 2 days later. It was unequivocal. The short answer? No. It's practically impossible. You can mimic the style, the pigments, the aging, but the exact microscopic web of fractures is a product of centuries of specific environmental changes. Replicating it would be like trying to forge a snowflake. What you're looking at isn't a forgery. It's a photograph. There it was. Confirmation. The painting was a lie. This was my anchor. If the Vermeer was fake, what else was? So the next thread was Ethelred Global. I'd hit a wall with it before, but now I was looking for a ghost, a shell company. Here's how the game works. White-collar criminals use shell corporations for all sorts of things, like money laundering and hiding assets. These companies only exist on paper, often registered in places with strict privacy laws. The goal is to create a web of transactions so complex that investigators get lost. This technique is called layering. I spent weeks digging through corporate registries in Panama, the British Virgin Islands, and Cyprus. It was a snake eating its own tail. But this time, I wasn't just looking for owners. I was looking for signs of life. I started cross-referencing the names of directors. Most were just nominee directors, lawyers paid to sit on thousands of boards. But then I found a name that appeared more than once as a signatory, Eric Tan. So I went back to Thorne's acquisitions. Ethelred had bought an AI company, Sentient Dynamics, for $1.2 billion. I tracked down a former VP who'd been pushed out. The Ethelred deal was weird from the start. We never met Thorne. The whole thing was handled by this guy Eric Tan, a real slick operator. He was just a proxy. That was the connection. Eric Tan. It's a classic tactic. In the real-life MDB scandal, the fugitive financier Joe Lowe used proxies and intermediaries, some also named Eric Tan, to handle his affairs. "What about the money?" I asked. "The $1.2 billion?" He laughed. "That's the crazy part. It didn't come from one place. It was hundreds of wire transfers from hundreds of different shell companies. Our finance department had a collective aneurysm. Looking back, it looked a lot like layering. It looked like money laundering." My heart was pounding. The fraud wasn't just about faking a lifestyle. The parties and the fake art weren't the crime. They were the distraction. They were tools to build a myth of legitimacy so men like Silas Thorne could move vast sums of dirty money in plain sight. The real story wasn't fake billionaire exposed. It was global money laundering ring uncovered. This was the playbook of MDB scandal, where billions were laundered through luxury assets, jets, yachts, and fine art. Now it all started to click. The private jet? FAA records showed it was leased from a charter company. The mega yacht? Rented. After weeks of digging, I found even the penthouse was owned by an anonymous trust and leased to Ethelred Global. He owned nothing. It was all a performance. Like Joe Lowe, who allegedly paid celebrities to attend his parties to bolster his image, Thorne hadn't just rented assets, he was renting a life. I confirmed this with a disgruntled former assistant to a celebrity who was a regular at Thorne's parties. Odd? The whole thing was odd. We were paid to be there. Not me, my boss. 10 grand a pop just to show up and talk about how brilliant Mr. Thorne was. We called them friendship fees. I finally had the full picture. A fake billionaire fronting a global money laundering operation. He was a polite, awkward frontman designed to inspire confidence while his associates moved stolen billions. He told a story so compelling, no one bothered to check if it was true. I had the story. It was bigger and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Publishing it wouldn't just make my career. It could very well end my life. I took a deep breath and started to write. Writing this story was like assembling a bomb. Every fact had to be triple sourced. I knew the moment this went live, I'd be facing an army of expensive lawyers. One mistake, and they would tear me and the story apart. I worked in secret on encrypted drives. My outlet, to their credit, stood by me, assigning their top legal counsel to vet every sentence. It took 2 solid months of 18-hour days. My editor, Sarah, was a rock. She challenged every single assertion. "They'll say the painting was a placeholder," she'd bark on our late-night calls. "Prove it wasn't." "They'll say Eric Tan is a common name," she'd challenge. "Connect this Eric Tan to Thorne, concretely." "They'll say renting a jet is just smart business," she'd argue. "Show the pattern. Prove intent." Each challenge sent me digging deeper. I found flight manifests from a private airport with both S. Thorne and E. Tan listed as passengers. I compiled a mountain of invoices and lease agreements for every asset, proving the pattern. This wasn't smart business. It was a carefully constructed illusion. The most dangerous part was finding the source of the money. Then I got a break, a whistleblower, an anonymous email in my encrypted inbox. The sender was a compliance officer at a small bank Athelred had acquired. He had documents, SWIFT transfer records. They showed billions of dollars from state-owned enterprises, funds meant for public infrastructure projects, being funneled through a maze of shell companies into Athelred's accounts. The money was stolen public funds, kleptocracy on a global scale. Thorne was working for corrupt governments. Those documents were the core of the bomb. My story was now about the hidden architecture of global corruption. The night before publication was the longest of my life. The story was titled "The Billionaire Who Wasn't There: Inside Silas Thorne's Empire of Lies." We had one final call. "Once we hit this button, there's no going back," the publisher said. "Alex, you need to be prepared. We've arranged for security." I thought about the quiet, awkward man at the party. His harmless persona was a weapon designed to make people underestimate him. He exploited our desire to trust. I had looked behind the curtain. Now I was about to show the world. "I'm ready," I said. "All right," Sarah said. "Let's burn him to the ground." At 5 a.m., the story went live. I sat alone in my apartment, watching the analytics tracker. First, a trickle, then a flood, then a tidal wave. The story exploded. By noon, Silas Thorne was the #1 trending topic worldwide. The bomb had detonated. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. For 12 hours, official silence. Then, the empire collapsed. The story caused a bank run on Thorne's credibility. Partners issued statements distancing themselves. Lenders called in loans. The celebrity friends suddenly had collective amnesia. By the end of day 1, the Department of Justice announced an investigation, citing our report. Interpol issued a notice for both Silas Thorne and Eric Tan. The massive fraud was laid bare for all to see. It was like the Wirecard scandal and the 1MDB affair rolled into one. But Thorne himself had vanished. When federal agents raided the penthouse, they found it empty. The fake art was still on the walls, but all personal effects were gone. He had slipped away like a ghost. His current whereabouts remained unknown, though, like the fugitive Joe Lowe, he's likely in a country with no extradition treaty, protected by the very people whose money he laundered. The legal battles were immense, but our story held. My life changed overnight. I went from being an anonymous journalist to the man who unmasked Silas Thorne. I got the book deal, I won the awards, but it came at a price. I had security for a year. I received countless threats. But the real change was internal. Thorne's con worked because it was simple. He understood that if you project an image of unimaginable wealth, people get too busy admiring the view from the penthouse to ever question the source. He sold a story we all wanted to believe. We want to believe in the myth of the genius billionaire because the truth that some great fortunes are built on crime and corruption is just too ugly. It all came back to that one impossible detail, a crack in a painting that exposed a crack in a global criminal conspiracy. It's a reminder that the biggest lies are often hidden in the smallest details,
And sometimes, all it takes to bring down an empire is to pull on a single thread and not be afraid of what you might unravel. The story of Silas Thorne forces us to ask how many others are out there, operating in plain sight, their legitimacy built on nothing more than a well-told lie. What do you think? Have you ever run into something that just seemed too good to be true? Let me know in the comments. This investigation was a long and difficult journey, and stories like these are more important than ever. If you believe in the power of investigative journalism to hold power accountable, please consider supporting channels that do this work. Thanks for watching.